Digitization is on a fast track, and thanks to key innovations under the umbrella of Industry 4.0. We're moving on a trail where digital twin is considered to be a necessity in the coming days and a great mechanism to stay in control of the expansive data that gets generated. Of course, you can always get creative in how you visualize data, and you can always overlay data on a 3D twin of a physical asset. In today's episode, we look at the technicalities behind how to create a digital twin. Hi everyone, welcome to TGIF, another Friday, another episode. As I said earlier, we're going to focus on digital twins. The question is, what can I do with a digital twin? As you see on the screen right now, you basically look at synchronizing environments, the physical and the virtual environment. You've monitored data which is going through the environments. You track the past, of course, you want descriptive statistics, and eventually you analyze data so that you can do predictive statistics, right? And of course, there are scenarios where you want to simulate in the virtual world before you apply the same into the physical world. So simulation happens in the physical world, right? That's where, and finally, when it comes to looking at the overall aspect of digital twin, which is the dire need, is interactivity. That means it's not a one-way traffic. It is duplicate communication. That means ability for us to look at data, act upon it, and also action if at all some updates have to be pushed back to the physical environment, right? Now, let's jump into how do we build a twin leveraging the power of Azure. So Azure Digital Twin is a managed service offering in the cloud. So let me share, I would say, the design thinking behind how do we construct a digital twin in reality. Okay, let me switch to my presentation. As you see on the screen right now, on the left hand side is the factory smart twin representation. And typically in a factory setup, you would definitely have data producers, either IoT or OT or IT systems. So each of them are pushed to Azure Cloud Services. That's number one. And data eventually has to be represented in a twin. So here are the two aspects, a twin model and a twin graph. So twin model is actual representation of your facility, in this case smart building, and you define that using digital twin definition language. It's a Dacian construct, and of course there are industry ontologies. If you want to take a base blueprint as a reference and redefine your smart building or a factory, absolutely doable instead of starting from scratch, right? Of course, second element is twin graph. So eventually there are relationships that exist within your setup. For example, floor 1 has 10 rooms. So how do you define the relationship between floor and the rooms? That's where you bring in twin graph. Yeah. And eventually the data will move towards from cloud service onto the twin. That's where you can actually explore using Twin Explorer. We'll see that in a few seconds. Extreme right hand side, you have the actual visualization. This is where it gets interesting. So the data that's coming out of Azure Cloud Services eventually gets represented on the graphical UI interface. In this case, it can be 3D model of your physical setup, right? The best part is you have a query language. You can query anytime. It's called Digital Twin Query Language, very SQL-like. You query the twin for any data you want and represent that on visualization, right? Again, it's a two-way communication. You want to push back some updates to the graph, you can do that. Eventually, it updates the physical setup. So this is a classic representation of how data flows from the real setup, which is factory smart building, in this case, onto visualization. Yeah. So that was basic design behind how do you construct a twin. Now let me switch over to Azure Portal and show you how do you basically create a model and how do you represent the graph of the model, and eventually how do you pull information using digital twin query language. So as you see on the screen right now, I'm in Azure Portal and I've created Azure Digital Twin instance. We also get to Azure Digital Twin Explorer in a few seconds. So before that, it's important to represent a physical space. In this case, we'll take a simple example of a room, right? The room has property which is temperature and humidity, as you see right here. And this is defined in what we mentioned earlier, which is digital twin definition language. And the second one is representing the floor, right? In terms of the properties, right? So I said earlier, first is defining the model, which is what you see on the screen right now. Second, of course, is to define the relationship. Now, here's a case. We have an Excel sheet here, which is what we're going to upload later. Here we're defining that yes, floor 1 contains room 1 and floor 0 contains room 0, right? And this is the initial data. That means assuming that there's something which eventually in real time will come from your real physical setup. Yeah. Now, Once we have this, we're going to go to Twin Explorer and upload information. I've already done that. After uploading, once I query the Twin Explorer, I'm going to get the actual construction of that. So here, I mentioned earlier, the relationship is floor 1 contains room 1. And of course, as you see here on the right-hand side, you can see the twin properties as well. As I select room 0, which is temperature humidity, I can select room 1. These are information that you're showing right now, but otherwise in reality, they'll come from the actual Azure services, which would have pushed that information onto the digital twin. Let's see an example of how you query using digital twin query language. Here, I want to understand, find out a room which has temperature greater than 75, right? I'm going to run the query. Assuming you would do that on your twin when the need be, and this is how you do it, right? So perfect. So what you just saw was a classic example of how do you create a digital twin. Of course, theoretically, it's straightforward. And the best part is, as Microsoft, we've democratized this space on Azure under the umbrella of Azure Digital Twin. It's very simple to do it. Of course, complexity comes in terms of infrastructure. That's where industry ontologists come in handy. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining in today. Have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend ahead. Bye-bye.